Einstein's famous equation can be reformulated to represent a geometrical process of energy exchange. The c² can represent the speed of light radiating out in a sphere of electromagnetic radiation. We have to square the process because it is unfolding in relation to the surface of the sphere. The two-dimensional surface of the sphere forms a manifold for positive and negative charge. The uncertainty that we encounter in our daily life arises out of an exchange of photon energy upon the curvature of this manifold. The brackets in the equation represent this two-dimensional manifold, forming a dynamic boundary condition of an individual reference frame with an arrow of time or timeline for each frame of reference. This process forms what we experience as the continuum of time. This is represented in the equation by the Lorentz factor being placed between the energy and the mass. In this theory, energy slows the rate that time flows as a universal process of energy exchange, with a probabilistic future coming into existence with each photon-electron interaction. Mass increases in relation to this dynamic geometry, with gravity as a secondary process to the electromagnetic force. The infinity symbol represents an infinite number of dynamic interactive reference frames that are continuously coming in and out of existence. This is a basic description of the wave function collapse to explain an intuitive explanation of what is actually happening. In quantum mechanics, we use the wave function to measure probabilistic predictions. An important aspect of what we call a measurement in quantum mechanics doesn't actually have to be done by a measurement device. In quantum mechanics, a measurement can happen just by the interaction between lots of particles, like say photons interacting with grains of dust. Therefore, the wave function is everywhere, collapsing and reforming continuously. The way to have an intuitive, logical explanation of what is happening is to think of the collapse of the wave function as a new moment in time that has the geometry of spacetime. When we make a measurement, there is a somewhat random and unpredictable collapse into one of the possible measurement states, and this depends on what the wave function looked like just before we made the measurement. It collapses into one state rather than continuously flowing from one state to another, and then at that new moment in time, just after the measurement, once again the wave function starts flowing, forming probability based on the new measurement state. This is totally logical if we think of the mathematics of quantum mechanics as representing the physics of time. The electromagnetic fields are not quantized, it is just the energy transfer processes between field and matter, between photons and electrons, that are quantized. We have electromagnetic waves flowing out, forming the carrier for potential quantized photon energy. The energy contained in a wave spreads out, forming probability within the characteristics of three-dimensional space. This energy is converted back to another form of energy in a very local and quantized event by light photon energy continuously transforming potential energy into the kinetic energy of matter in the form of electrons. Kinetic energy is the energy of what is actually happening. This geometrical process, formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light photon energy, is continuously forming a probabilistic, uncertain future.
In other theories, it can seem puzzling that there is no concept or flow of time in the subatomic world within the atoms that is governed by the strong nuclear force. But in this theory, nothing could be more logical, because the future is unfolding with each new photon-electron coupling or dipole moment in an interactive process that is unfolding outside the atomic nucleus and is relative to the electromagnetic force. It is impossible to predict when a particular atom will decay, regardless of how long the atom has existed. However, for a group of atoms, the group expected decay rate is characterized in what is called half-lives. The half-life represents the time after which half of the group's nuclei will have decayed. Mainstream physics has no objective or logical understanding of why we should have such a property as half-life when we are dealing with decaying atoms. But if time and the future itself is relative to the atoms interacting with electromagnetic radiation or light, it would be logical that probabilities are built into the process itself. Therefore, we can't predict the decay of an individual atom and only measure the half-life of a group of atoms. This idea is supported by the weak nuclear force being the only known interaction that does not conserve parity and violates CP symmetry. In this theory, the future is unfolding with the movement of charge, with matter-antimatter annihilation representing a fundamental part of the process. The annihilation of the antimatter represents the past, with perfect symmetry between positive and negative charge, and between matter and antimatter. It is this symmetry that is represented by CP symmetry that is broken by the radiation or radioactive decay of the weak force or interaction. We could say that there is a mirror image between the future and the past at the moment of creation, or at each dipole moment.
The problem with understanding time is the concept of now. In this theory, as a process of continuous energy exchange, we are always in the center of our own reference frame, in the moment of now. We have an emergent uncertain future, unfolding relative to electromagnetic waves, forming light photon vibrations or oscillations as they interact with the atoms. The wave-particle duality of light and matter in the form of electrons are acting like the bits or zeros and ones of a computer, forming a blank canvas that we can interact with, forming the possible into the actual. Each individual life form remains in the moment of now, in the center of their own reference frame, because the electromagnetic waves that form consciousness forms an emergent future relative to the wavelength of the light and the structure of the brain. In other words, conscious awareness is the most advanced part of an emergent process that we measure as a period of time relative to the atoms of the periodic table. Because we are made of atoms, it is logical that the future is relative to the energy and momentum of our actions. In this theory, creation is truly in the hand and eye of the beholder. In physics, there are two long-range forces, the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force. They both share the same geometry, in the form of the inverse square law. These videos explain how both forces are based on the same geometrical process of energy exchange, with gravity being a secondary process to the electromagnetic force. This can be seen in the simple fact that gravitational potential energy goes down when two masses come together. For example, as a falling object gets closer to the ground, its gravitational potential energy decreases. Therefore, if we have a group of mass in the universe, the gravitational potential energy just goes down and down. But energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, there must be a process that is changing gravitational potential energy into another form of energy. This can be explained by light photon energy continuously transforming potential energy into the kinetic energy of matter in the form of electrons. Kinetic energy is the energy of what is actually happening. As objects free fall towards the ground, its gravitational potential energy is transformed into kinetic energy with the spontaneous absorption and emission of photon energy, continuously forming a probabilistic, uncertain future. This geometrical interpretation of quantum mechanics can give us a simple explanation for the fine structure constant or coupling constant 137. When light waves interact with the spherical electron probability cloud that surrounds the nucleus of an atom, there is an exchange of energy formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light. The absorption forms a photon-electron coupling, and at that moment in time, the energy levels cannot drop below the center of the sphere, because the process is relative to the radius and the spherical surface. This forms a minimum amount of energy, forming a constant of action in space and time that we see mathematically as the Planck constant, linked to 2 pi, representing the circumference of the sphere. When the energy levels drop, it also forms another geometrical constant relative to the square of probability and the spherical surface. This is seen mathematically as the fine structure constant or coupling constant 137. The absorption of light is followed by the emission of a new light wave that forms a probabilistic, uncertain future that can be seen mathematically as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Oxygen and hydrogen atoms bond together to form the characteristics of water. We have oxygen and hydrogen forming standing waves over a period of time in the form of water molecules. In this theory, the atoms do not just form standing waves over a period of time, but they form their own future relative to their energy and momentum. The water molecules will do this by continuously forming and breaking hydrogen bonds relative to the flow of the water. The molecules of water are continuously moving in relation to each other, and the hydrogen bonds are continuously breaking and reforming. This process forms dipole moments with the separation of charge, with the absorption and emission of photon energy. In this theory, this represents the future coming into existence within the reference frame of the water, relative to the energy and momentum of the water molecules. Because time and space are interlinked, in this theory it makes sense that if you increase the temperature of the water, you will increase the photon energy, increasing the space between the atoms of the water as time unfolds, photon by photon. If the increase in temperature continues, the increase in space and time formed by photon energy will be too great, and the atoms of the water will break away, and we have a change of state from liquid to gas in the form of the creative nature of steam. This process also fits in with observations. If you decrease the temperature, there will be less photon energy, for the breaking of hydrogen bonds that allow the movement of the atoms as a liquid. Therefore, if the decrease in temperature continues, there will be a change in state from liquid to a solid in the form of ice. Note, the atoms still form their own future relative to their position, in this case the decreasing temperature, and this can be seen in the individuality and diversity of snowflake formation. There are no two patterns of snowflakes the same in the world. This diversity is formed by subtle changes in photon energy that in this theory represents part of a process of continuous creation at the quantum level of the atoms. This diversity is possible because we have a process of spherical symmetry, forming and breaking, that even with only two types of atoms, of hydrogen and oxygen, can form an infinity of possibilities that we see as snowflake diversity. This process of symmetry forming and breaking can also be seen in the chemical reaction known as the BZ reaction. That is a spontaneous self-organizing activity, forming patterns of concentric rings. The cause can be very tiny, just light or photon energy can create this process of spontaneous symmetry forming. If you break this symmetry by putting a hot wire into it, you will form rotating spirals. But to create broken symmetry, there has to be a process of symmetry forming to start with. This video will put forward the idea that this symmetry can be explained by quantum mechanics in the form of symmetry, not just in space, but also in the form of time symmetry.
In quantum mechanics, 2 pi and 4 pi represent the limit or boundary condition for a process of mathematical rotation or quantum spin. But what is spinning in quantum mechanics? It seems to be probability and uncertainty. This is like asking the question, what is waving, in the wave equation? I believe we can have an objective, intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics if we explain it as a geometrical process based on 4 pi and 2 pi. The 4 pi can represent spherical geometry. This can be based on Huygens' principle of 1670 that says every point on a wavefront has the potential for a new spherical wave. We can think of the point on the wavefront as a photon of energy with an uncertain probabilistic future unfolding with each photon-electron interaction. Because the process is unfolding relative to the spherical surface of the wavefront, we have to square the radius, r squared. This is seen in the mathematics of quantum mechanics as c squared, the speed of the process, the speed of light squared, and e squared, representing the electron squared. Spheres always intersect as circles, and this is why we have 2 pi in the mathematics of quantum mechanics. The two-dimensional surface of the sphere forms a manifold or boundary condition for positive and negative charge. The inner concave surface forms negative charge, and the outer surface forms positive charge. Light radiates out as a sphere, and when the surface of the sphere comes in contact with the electron probability cloud of an atom, it forms a photon-electron coupling, and our three-dimensional world changes with the movement of positive and negative charge. We measure this process as the passage of time, with the interior of the sphere forming our three-dimensional space. Therefore, we have Heisenberg's uncertainty principle between position and momentum, with 4 pi in the equation representing the spherical geometry. If we reformulate the uncertainty using energy and time instead of position and momentum, we have 2 pi in the equation representing the surface of the sphere. This geometrical interpretation of quantum mechanics is supported by the fact that the Planck constant is also linked to 2 pi. When there is an exchange of energy in the form of photon-electron coupling or dipole moment, the energy levels cannot drop below the center of the sphere because the process is relative to the radius. This forms a minimum amount of energy, forming a constant of action in space and time that we see mathematically as the Planck constant, linked to 2 pi, representing the circumference of the sphere. This diagram represents a photon creating an electron-positron pair at point A, with the positron, the antiparticle of the electron, being annihilated at point B. In mainstream physics, some people have said that the zigzag track can represent the world line, with the positron travelling backwards in time between point B and A. This is represented by time being an upward direction in the diagram, with the line representing the positron pointing downwards. By placing a circle over a Feynman diagram, representing an emergent light sphere radiating out from A to B, there is no particle travelling backwards in time. In this theory, each photon-electron coupling forms a new moment in time that has the dynamic geometry of spacetime. Time is not an upward direction in the diagram. It emerges spherically, with the interior of the sphere forming three-dimensional space. The annihilation of antimatter represents the past, with the wavefront representing a probabilistic, uncertain future. Photon energy is continuously transforming potential energy into the kinetic energy of matter in the form of electrons. Kinetic energy is the energy of what is actually happening as the future unfolds. We have the great complexity and diversity of life, and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution explains how these life forms changed over time, but it says nothing on how the first cell life formed out of non-living matter. This theory explains how a geometrical process based on physics could have formed the dynamic geometry and driving force for the first cell life. This is an image from the International Space Station of a candle flame in zero gravity. We can see that it naturally forms a sphere, with the spherical surface interacting with the environment. This is very similar to a living cell. We have the build-up and organization of charge relative to the membrane of each living cell within us. All we would need is spherical geometry to arise naturally in the universe, and it could form a template for cell life. The interior of the sphere would naturally form the characteristics of three-dimensional space, with the two-dimensional surface forming a boundary condition for positive and negative charge. We have this geometrical process of energy exchange with the movement of charge whenever our everyday life changes. A process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking could form a repetition for greater complexity to emerge. The spontaneous absorption and emission of light forms a movement of positive and negative charge, making chemical systems automatically self-assemble into stable spheres. Light photon energy is continuously transforming potential energy into the kinetic energy of matter in the form of electrons. Just a change in environmental temperature could trigger this process, forming the potential for statistical entropy, with the probability that greater complexity and diversity could emerge.
In these videos, I explain a theory that puts forward the idea that everything is based on one universal process, and biophotons can be part of this process. Biophotons are simply light that is emitted from biological materials, such as the human body or any life form. These biophotons are just outside the range of visible light, with shorter wavelengths and faster frequencies. Just like visible light, they are electromagnetic waves, the same as all the other waves in the electromagnetic spectrum, which ranges from radio waves that have a very long wavelength and a relative slow frequency, through to gamma rays with a very short wavelength and a fast frequency. In these videos I say that light is a wave over a period of time and only has particle characteristics when it interacts with the atoms of the periodic table. Within such a process, the wave-particle duality of light and matter in the form of electrons is forming a blank canvas that we can interact with. This gives us the potential to form the possible into the actual, with an uncertain future unfolding photon by photon. But for this process to be logical, it would have to form an interactive base for classical physics, biology, and chemistry. And this is where the biophoton comes in, by creating a certain degree of order, which is transferred by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light with the movement of charge. We have the build-up and organization of charge relative to the membrane of each living cell, with hundreds of thousands of chemical reactions in each cell at any one moment. Add to this that we have tens of billions of cells in our body, with unimaginable numbers of biophotons, forming reactions that take nanoseconds and cause a cascade of long-standing effects. There is only one way to explain this that can make biological and chemical processes possible and logical, and that is that the future is unfolding photon by photon relative to the atoms of the periodic table and the wavelength of the light. This is difficult to comprehend because at high temperature we have a phase change of matter, with charge being able to cover a large area of interstellar space in the form of plasma. There is a beautiful similarity between interstellar space and biological systems. When plasma was first discovered, they could not decide what name to give it. They thought about calling it uniform discharge or equilibrium discharge, but then someone seen the similarity of how filaments move within the discharge and the way blood plasma moves red and white blood cells around the body. So they decided to call the uniformed discharge plasma. This similarity would be logical if the cellular structure of cell life and the cellular structure of interstellar space are based on the same universal process. Please sub and share. It will help the promotion of this theory. The golden ratio can be found almost everywhere, and it has been said that it represents a universal law in which is contained the ground principle of all formative striving for beauty and completeness in the realms of both nature and art, and which permeates as a paramount spiritual ideal all structures, forms, and proportions, whether cosmic or individual, organic or inorganic, which finds its fullest realization in human form. But if you go to Google and tap in a reason for the golden ratio, you will find very little information giving a logical reason why the golden ratio is everywhere. The rest of this video is going to explain a reason based on physics, with mathematics representing the geometry of a dynamic process. The mathematics of the golden ratio is divided into two parts, A and B. This can represent the absorption and emission of light, photon energy, that forms a process of continuous energy exchange. This can be put into geometrical form by taking the two ends of the line and joining them together to form a circle. If we then place a point in the center of the circle and draw lines out across the radius to the A and B on the surface of the sphere, the angle formed at the center is the golden angle, 137.5 degrees. Mathematically, we have to square section A to form the golden rectangle out of section B. If we continuously repeat this process with smaller and smaller rectangles, we form the Fibonacci spiral. And this is exactly what we have within this process. We have a square in the form of the charge of the electron being squared, with the spontaneous absorption and emission of light, photon energy, forming a repetition of the process. In this theory, the fine structure constant, as part of a geometrical process, forms the golden angle, and with it the Fibonacci spiral that we see almost everywhere in nature. All the information I can find says that each new vector is formed by adding the two previous vectors together. This forms the Fibonacci sequence. In this theory, we have the Fibonacci numbers in nature, not because of economy of growth or space, but because time and space is being formed by the geometry and therefore the mathematics of this dynamic process. As can be seen on the diagram, we already have 0, representing the moment of now, time equals 0, with positive 1 and minus 1, representing the positive and negative of electromagnetic waves. Therefore, we even have the start of the Fibonacci sequence in the diagram. This is linked to Euler's identity, giving this beautiful equation a place in the structure of space and time. This theory explains a greater reality of one creative principle behind the laws of physics, forming something like a sounding board of a musical instrument that resonates with the vibrations of one's own thoughts, efforts and actions. In this theory, mass is a byproduct of time dilation. When time slows down, it takes more effort to move an object from A to B, and this is seen as an increase in mass. Also, Einstein's equivalence principle between gravity and acceleration falls out of this theory. Because energy and momentum have to increase for an object to accelerate, time dilation will increase relative to the acceleration. Therefore, we have the equivalence principle between gravity and acceleration. This will be felt as inertia in the direction of the acceleration. Therefore, we have Isaac Newton's first law of motion. Unless acted upon by a net unbalanced force, an object will maintain a constant velocity. This theory takes the dynamic interactive process of the general theory of relativity and extends it to our everyday life, explaining a universe that is continuously coming into existence relative to the energy and momentum of our own actions. Every individual is a part of this interactive process that forms the uncertainty and probability that is needed for the great game of life. But above all, this theory gives us an objective understanding of time as a process of continuous creation. Even a rose blooming will create its own arrow of time within its own reference frame. This fits in with the reality of our everyday life, with a past and potential future that we can interact with from the center of our own reference frame, turning the possible into the actual. This can be in the form of art and poetry. Therefore, even a dancer on the dance floor will interact with this process, forming their own future space-time, relative to their energy and momentum of their own actions. For in this theory, creation is truly in the hand and eye of the beholder, with an objective reality in the form of a dynamic interactive process that forms an infinity of possibilities. I have tried to make this theory as simple as possible in the belief that everyone should be able to understand it. In my other videos I explain this theory in much greater detail. As an artist, I am outside the scientific community, so any help you can give in promoting this theory will be gratefully welcomed. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe. It will help the promotion of this theory. At the most fundamental level, this is a process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking, relative to the atoms of the periodic table. The reason why there is something rather than nothing is that a process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking will naturally form entropy or disorganization, with a built-in potential for ever greater symmetry formation. This is because in such a process the future is not based totally on uncertainty. It is based on broken symmetry relative to the structure of the atoms. When the spherical symmetry is broken, it has the potential to form the most beautiful of geometrical shapes, with the Fibonacci spiral being visible almost everywhere in nature. There is an incredible diversity of objects that have formed the Fibonacci spiral, and the only thing they have in common is that their spirals were all formed over a period of time relative to the atoms of the periodic table. This is logical in this theory because the future is continuously unfolding with an exchange of photon energy relative to the atoms of the periodic table. It is because these spirals are formed out of broken symmetry that they are never perfect. This is because if the quantum wave particle function or probability function is reformulated as a linear vector, then all the information I can find says that each new vector is formed by adding the two previous vectors together. This forms the Fibonacci sequence. In this theory, we have the Fibonacci numbers in nature, not because of economy of growth or space, but because time and space is being formed by the geometry and therefore the mathematics of this dynamic process. As can be seen on the diagram, we already have 0, representing the moment of now, time equals 0, with positive 1 and minus 1, representing the positive and negative of electromagnetic waves. Therefore, we even have the start of the Fibonacci sequence in the diagram. This is linked to Euler's identity, giving this beautiful equation a place in the structure of space and time. There are many good videos on YouTube that explain the mathematical nature of the number E, but this video is different. It is going to explain a universal process that is a physical property of the universe, giving us a reason why the number E is so important in so many totally diverse subjects. Euler's number E can be found everywhere in such diverse things as radioactive decay, temperature change, probability theory, electronics, harmonic motion, chemistry, biology, and how the growth rate of interest on money is relative to the length of each time period it is calculated to. These are just a few of the subjects that are connected to Euler's number E. But there is one thing that connects all the diverse subjects that the number E is connected to, and that is they are all processes over a period of time. And I believe this is the key to understanding why the number E is everywhere in nature and physics. Einstein said that everything is vibrations, but if everything is just a form of energy vibration, then these vibrations must be forming what we see and feel as the passage of time. In such a process, we would have new vibrations continuously coming into existence, and others decaying away and becoming part of the past. This is the universal concept, or physical property of the universe, that forms Euler's number E. The number E is a constant because the future is always 100% based on the past, as a universal process of energy exchange. It makes no difference whether the energy exchange is representing growth or decay. In this theory, at the smallest scale, the future and the past are represented by matter-antimatter annihilation, with the 100% antimatter annihilation representing the past. In such a process, the future is unfolding at the smallest unit of vibrational energy, the light quanta, or photon of quantum mechanics. Space and time are properties of quanta, and not the other way around. Each photon vibration only occurs once, but the process of energy exchange is continuously forming the ever-changing world of our everyday life. We measure this process as a period of time relative to the atoms of the periodic table. The number E is part of the very nature of randomness itself, because the uncertainty of everyday life at the smallest scale is formed by the probability function, or quantum wave particle function, of quantum mechanics. In my other videos, I explain this process in much greater detail, but in this video I want to explain how the number E can be part of this geometrical process. The number E doesn't have a simple geometrical definition, but it is linked to constants that do, in one of the most beautiful equations known to man. This equation takes the form of Euler's identity. The idea is that E would represent a rate of change as time and space unfolds, with Euler's identity being interwoven into the dynamic fabric of spacetime, with the +1 representing one photon equals 0 time, t equals 0, the moment of now, within an individual reference frame. Within such a reference frame, the number E represents a constant of continuous change, of either growth or decay. Also, the number E represents the smoothing out of quanta into the ever-changing curvature of spacetime. A good way to visualize this is to take the exponential function and change the coordinating system from Cartesian coordination to polar coordination. When we do this, the graph turns into a logarithmic spiral that is self-similar, with all the branches having the same shape and rotational angle. This can be seen if we draw a tangent line of the spiral in red. The radial lines that started from the center point of the spiral are in black. What we find is the angle between any pair of these two lines will be the same, and since it is self-similar, the inner spiral will have the same property. This static diagram of a spiral has similarities with the number e, but we have to change this static diagram into something dynamic that is changing over a period of time to see the true nature of the number e. If we rotate or spin the spiral, we can see the angles remain constant over a period of time. We can imagine the spiral growing or expanding out from the center, representing Euler's constant e. Such a spiral has the potential to expand out forever, just as the number e, as an irrational number, never repeats and continues forever, forming something new. In this theory, the irrational numbers in our mathematics represents the infinite nature of space and time. This is why, when we consider something static, like the fixed ratio of a circle to its diameter, we find that the only possible way of analyzing the facts so we can determine the fixed value of pi is to express the relation in the form of an infinite series. Therefore we find pi and the imaginary number I in Euler's identity, representing the dynamic geometry of space-time that is relative to the constant e as the future unfolds, photon by photon. Multiplying by the imaginary number I is a rotation, with the imaginary numbers always being at right angles to the real numbers. In this theory, this is because electromagnetic fields are always at right angles to each other. The positive one and the negative one represents the positive and negative of electromagnetic waves. Therefore, we even have an objective reason for the start of the Fibonacci numbers, 0, 1, 1. When the quantum wave particle function or probability function is reformulated as a linear vector, each new vector is formed by adding the two previous vectors together. This forms the Fibonacci sequence. At the most fundamental level, this represents a process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking that forms the imperfect spiral symmetry of life that can be seen as the Fibonacci spiral in nature. When the spherical symmetry is broken, it forms spiral symmetry in the form of the Riemann surface rising up out of the complex plane, forming a spiral pattern. Each time we go around the origin, 2 pi cylindrical symmetry has to be added, and we find ourselves on another sheet of the complex plane. Pi represents a semicircle of the complex plane, with 2 pi representing a complete rotation. This is why the Planck constant is linked with 2 pi, representing a constant of action in the geometrical process we see and feel as the flow of time. This process forms the 3-dimensional space of our everyday life, with a past we can never change and a future that is always uncertain. There will always be uncertainty or probability at the quantum level and in our everyday life, because the imaginary number I is the square root of -1, representing the rotational symmetry, 2 pi, that maintains the quantum wave particle function, or probability function, at t equals 0. This represents the probability and uncertainty of everyday life, that at the smallest scale of this process is represented mathematically by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe. It will help the promotion of this theory. In conformal geometry, angles remain the same, while losing the notion of scale. Imagine you have a right-angle triangle in the palm of your hand. If the triangle was to expand out to half the size of the observable universe, the angles would remain the same. This information supports the idea that the universe could be based on one universal geometrical process, from the very small to the very large.
Many great scientists have found a similarity between local physical laws and the very large scale of the universe. One way to explain this is by a universal geometrical process based on conformal geometry, where angles remain the same, but there is no notion of scale. At the small scale, we can have spherical light waves radiating out, with the surface of the wave forming the potential for the exchange of photon energy with the movement of charge. At higher temperatures in the form of plasma, charge can cover a whole star or even a large area of interstellar space. But the same geometry is at play. This can be seen in the form of cellular space at the large scale of the universe. We have the formation of galaxies on the surface of the cellular structure. In this theory, we have the same geometrical process at the large scale in the form of plasma that we have at the small scale and low temperature relative to the atoms. We can see this with the organization of charge relative to the membrane of each living cell. In this theory, the universe is a light sphere of probability with no singularity, just spherical geometry forming the characteristics of three-dimensional space, with only one variable in the form of time. Please share and sub. It will help the promotion of this theory.